Thank you very much for joining us. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another Let's Lab webinar. That's part of our Digital Lounge series. And now, before I introduce today's guest speaker, I would like first to make a few housekeeping announcements. I must say that I'm absolutely delighted and albeit slightly nervous to say that today's event is a full house on Zoom. We will also be recording this session for those unable to attend, and you will find this as well as past webinars on our website. That's letslab.co.uk. There will be a discussion following Stacey's talk, so please feel free at any moment to share your questions in the Q&A box. I will be passing them on to Stacey soon after her talk. And now, should you also wish to take the floor, and depending on time, once I open the floor to discussion, please raise your virtual hand and we will make sure that you're also heard. As always, the nearest exit is at the bottom of the page where it says leave meeting, but I'm pretty sure you won't even go near that. This will no doubt be a fascinating talk. I would like to introduce today's webinar by taking a poll. Now, can you please raise your virtual hands if you have bought from Amazon during lockdown? We recently had a 1-year anniversary. Give it a couple of seconds. That's what I thought. So many people, and I'm raising my physical hand as well there. Guilty as charged indeed. So Amazon has never been more powerful than during this pandemic. The lockdown measures have resulted in a massive growth of online retail, and Amazon has been, in fact, one of the biggest beneficiaries. The 2020 CMA's approval of Amazon's investment in Deliveroo, or even the recent launch of the first Amazon Fresh shop in Ealing in London, is telling of the company's relentless innovation and automation strategies that leave little room for competition. As Amazon warehouse workers in Alabama make the final push toward unionizing, it is high time that we address the elephant in the room. Today's webinar will discuss how Amazon's concentration of power has led to a new platform-centered ecosystem that is threatening innovation, competition, and democracy. Today with us, we have an exquisite speaker. She barely needs an introduction. Joining us from Portland, Stacey Mitchell is the co-director of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, which produces research and develops policy to counter corporate control and build thriving, equitable communities. Now, Stacey has written extensively about the dangers of corporate concentration and the policies needed to counter it. Her in-depth reports on Amazon, including Amazon's stranglehold and Amazon's monopoly to toll booth, have drawn wide praise for illuminating the scope of the company's dominance and impact. She's also written for The Atlantic, The Nation, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and much, much more. Her book, Big Box Swindle, is available in the UK, and I must say it is quite a fascinating read. Now, ironically enough, this is also available on Amazon, but I'm sure that we can all do better than that and buy that elsewhere. Stacey, it is an absolute pleasure to have you with us, and the floor is all yours.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really lovely to be here. I really appreciate the invitation and for everyone turning out today for this conversation. I thought I would take just a few minutes to give a bit of an overview, highlight some of the concerns that we have about growing concentration in the economy and Amazon in particular, and then can turn things over for people's questions, comments, and we can go from there. As I'm Stacey Mitchell. I'm the co-director of an organization called the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. We're a think tank in the US. We do work really focused on how do we build thriving local communities. And one of the sort of central concerns across our work, we work in a number of different sectors of the economy on a number of different issues. One of the broad concerns that underlies a lot of our work is on the concentration of private power. We're deeply concerned about the fact that many parts of our economy are increasingly controlled by a small number of very powerful corporations, and that those corporations increasingly are reorganizing society in ways that benefit them at the expense of most people, and that also that their economic power inevitably translates into political power, and they exert increasing influence over government. So for us, this concentration of economic power is a political problem, that it is in many respects a direct threat to democracy. So that's kind of a little bit of our big picture approach and concern. And we do research. We do a lot of research to understand these issues. And we develop policy models and approaches for addressing them. And then we work with a variety of grassroots organizations to advocate and push for those policy changes. So just to say, with regard to concentration, we one of the things that we have seen is that as I said, many parts of the economy have become increasingly concentrated. There are a small number of companies that dominate various parts, and that has a lot of implications. It has implications for our ability to earn a living. We know that the growing income inequality, the fact that wages for people at the bottom really haven't budged in decades, that a lot of that is a result of the fact that you have a few companies that have so much power that they're able to effectively hold down wages. We've also seen a collapse in small independent businesses, and indeed a collapse in the formation of new businesses. The rate at which we're creating new businesses is substantially lower than it was a couple of decades ago. And again, a lot of that has to do with the power of a handful of companies to really keep competition at bay. And then ultimately, as I noted, there are implications around this problem for our communities and ultimately for our democracy. So that's the context. And to talk a little bit about Amazon in particular, within this larger context of concentration, we now have this somewhat new phenomenon of these powerful digital gatekeepers. Google, Facebook, Apple, and Amazon. And these are companies that have become gatekeepers to critical parts of our online economy, and then exercise that power in ways that further entrench their dominance and extend it into new areas. So in the case of Amazon, we could spend the entire next hour with me doing nothing but just listing all of the businesses that they're in. Amazon produces hit television shows and movies. They are selling satellite surveillance services to military and police departments. They make loans to small businesses. They are the largest retailer in the US of clothing, toys, and consumer electronics. They also sell more than half of all books, both print and digital, and they publish a growing number of books. They're now a major publisher. They produce, indeed, as a manufacturer, a growing number of products. They have dozens of clothing brands. They produce batteries and a whole suite of products for the home under their own labels. They are a major grocery retailer. They're moving into finance. They're moving into healthcare. They just announced this week a new healthcare service where companies can sign on and then make available to their employees access to doctors and healthcare workers through Amazon. As I said, we could spend the next hour with me doing nothing but just listing off all of the different businesses that Amazon is in. And so it kind of raises this fundamental question of well, what is Amazon? There are all these different things. How do we even understand this company? For a long time, or one of the sort of common ways that people think about Amazon in a way that I think is not actually correct is we think about Amazon as a big retailer. And in fact, I think we make a mistake when we think about Amazon as a retailer. Certainly they are a dominant retailer. They sell a lot of stuff. Yes, they are a retailer, but that's not fundamentally what the company is really about. I think the way to understand Amazon is that what they're really about is infrastructure. And they have these core pieces of infrastructure. And by that, I mean these systems that other companies must use in order to reach the market. And so the most dominant piece of this is their online marketplace. Among Americans, 2/3 of Americans, when they want to buy something online, they start right on Amazon. It used to be that they went to a search engine, typed in the product that they were looking for, and they would get a bunch of results. It would include Amazon, but it would include other retailers. It would include perhaps a local store in their neighborhood, and they would choose among those. But now the vast majority of people just go straight to Amazon and they type their search in there. And what this means is that if you're a company that makes or sells anything and you want to reach consumers online, you have two options. You can either sell on your own website and compete for 1/3 of consumers, a kind of shrinking pool of consumers that are looking around more broadly, and give up access to 2/3 of the market right out of the gate. You're not even going to compete for those customers. Or you can sell on Amazon and get access to the majority of customers. But once you sell on Amazon, now you're reliant on a company that is also competing against you, that also makes and sells exactly what you're selling. They can see what you are doing. They can see which of your products are popular. They can change the rules for how you sell. They can change the rules for the algorithm that decides if you even show up in the search results. They can change those rules overnight, and they can just destroy your business. So it's an incredibly vulnerable place to be, and one that is not very successful. So, you're between a rock and a hard place. You either go it alone and lose out on the market, or you try to compete in the market, but you're constantly being monitored and abused by this company that both controls what you need and competes against you. And this is what I mean about the nature of Amazon really being as an infrastructure company. The retail marketplace is a major part of its infrastructure, but it also has several other key pieces of infrastructure that it's developed over time. So another piece is Amazon's logistics operation, and this is its warehousing and shipping service. Amazon has built out warehousing and has its own fleet of delivery drivers. It now has planes, trucks, all of the equipment needed to do shipping. They've built that out in a matter of just a few years, and they have become so large. They are delivering so many packages, not only their own packages, but packages of other companies. People order online at other sites. They're delivering some of those packages too. They're now doing so much of that they rival the US Postal Service in the number of packages that they're delivering. They're huge. Overnight, they have become enormous. That's another piece of infrastructure. And then the other two that I'll name is that Amazon is a dominant provider of cloud services. So Amazon Web Services accounts for about 40% of the world's global cloud computing capacity is held by Amazon. Huge number of major corporations, governments around the world rely on that infrastructure to manage their data and to run their applications. Their computing applications are now run in the cloud. A lot of that is now happening on Amazon's cloud infrastructure. And then lastly, I would just note the most recent or most sort of cutting edge piece of its infrastructure is Amazon is a voice platform, Alexa. Alexa is 70% of the voice market. Amazon smart speakers are installed in a growing number of homes, offices, other kinds of workplaces. They're being installed Alexa is now the platform for cars. You buy a new car, it's voice operated, it's Alexa that you're interacting with. You go to a store, it's Alexa that's the voice system within the store. And also lots of different devices and appliances are being connected, the whole smart home, smart office. The infrastructure of that, the interface for that is primarily Alexa. And so again, with this voice, you can see, and this is true across all of this infrastructure, if you're a company that has a service that you're offering online, like a music streaming service, and you want people to be able to call it up through voice, you've got to rely on Amazon's voice system. If you're a company that makes a dishwasher and you want it to be connected into a smart home system, well, it's Amazon's voice infrastructure that you have to rely on. And so you begin to see, I think, if you think about this, what Amazon really is, what Jeff Bezos has really built, which is this infrastructure whereby eventually every other company in the economy, every other producer, author, writer, creator who wants to make something and sell it online, they have to do it on Amazon's platform. They want to ship something that arrives on a customer's doorstep, they do it through Amazon's logistics. They have data in the cloud, it's on Amazon's infrastructure. They want to be part of the growing interface of voice, it's through Alexa. And now, with all of that, Amazon has a godlike view of everything that is happening across the economy. They can see what people are doing online, what they're browsing for, what they're buying, what they're not buying. They can see what companies are shipping which goods, which kinds of shipments are popular in New York versus Los Angeles. They can see which companies have a lot of traffic in the cloud and say, let's say there's a new service of some kind that's being offered. Amazon can see the cloud data and say, that service is really popular in Chicago and Houston. So maybe we want to get into that business too. And where's a good place for us to go? Well, let's go to Chicago because people in Chicago want that service. There's an incredible amount of information that Amazon is able to glean about all of us and about all of the many competitors that it faces. And then it can harness that information to build out its own goods, build out its own services, and dominate one market after another, all from that perspective of infrastructure. One of the other things that's really important, I think, about understanding Amazon in this way is that it's not only about we control the rails or the pipelines, and therefore we can give preference to our own products. So let's say Amazon goes into manufacturing a product like a new computer device. And they decide, well, you know what, we're going to put ours at the top of the search results. We're going to take up all of that traffic. They have that ability to do that with anything they want. But the other aspect of this that's really critical to understanding their power is that in effect, they have set up a system where they can levy a kind of toll or a tax on all of this other activity in the economy. Every time a seller on Amazon Marketplace sells something, they have to give a cut to Amazon. And that cut has grown over time. In 5 years ago, it was 19%. So every $100 in sales they made, they gave $19 to Amazon. Now it's $31. Every $100 a seller makes on Amazon's platform, Amazon keeps $31 of that. And where else are you going to go? They can keep taking more and more and more. And this is the same with the cloud. It's the same with voice. Essentially, you own the infrastructure. You get to set up your gatekeeper, and you get to set up a toll, and you get to take a piece of everything that moves through that gate. That's incredible. It is an just sort of exquisite machine for siphoning revenue from the entire, for huge swaths of the whole economy. And when you begin to think about it that way, you start to understand how this company has become so wealthy, how much cash they have, and how wealthy Jeff Bezos has become. He's now worth almost $200 billion. And that is because he is effectively taxing so much of the world's trade, taking pennies on these transactions that move through his infrastructure, and has amassed this incredible amount of wealth. And this begins to shed light on why, as Amazon grows, we have an increasingly unequal society with a handful of people who have enormous wealth and lots of people who are struggling really to get by. So I just wanted to talk briefly about some of the implications of this and some of the policy issues, and then turn things over to you for your questions. So As I mentioned at the beginning, one of the consequences of this is that we've seen just this collapse in small and mid-sized businesses. Companies that produce things are being squeezed by Amazon and squeezed out of the market. Competing small businesses and retailers are being driven out of the market. More and more, the rest of the economy is anemic. And so one of the consequences of this is regional. We have in the US a few cities that are prospering. Seattle, where Amazon's headquarters is, has become a very wealthy place. Houses are very expensive. There's a growing homelessness problem, but there are lots of high-paying jobs. Washington, D.C., where they're putting their next headquarters, is another place that's seen a lot of high-paying jobs. There are a handful of places like that, but then the rest of the country, you have other cities, rural areas, small towns. Increasingly, their businesses are gone, and there are very few jobs, and the jobs that are there don't pay very well. And so we have this growing divide between places that are extremely wealthy and places that are just absolutely desperate and impoverished. And that's tearing apart the country. It's really tearing apart our civic fabric. We also have, from just a purely consumer kind of standpoint, a loss of innovation. I've talked to a lot of small companies like toy producers, book publishing houses. What they say is that Amazon is squeezing us so much that we don't have any money left over to invest in new ideas and creating new products. That kind of innovation is really being lost, and it's particularly concerning in the publishing industry, where new authors, small publishers have very hard time making their way in this world, because Amazon, yes, you can find anything on it. If you know what you're looking for, you can find it on Amazon. But the problem is that for browsing, for just looking around and seeing something you didn't know you wanted, like a book an author you never had heard of. If you're shopping in a bookstore, especially an independent bookstore, there's a high rate at which people discover new books that they didn't know about that they'd like to read. That doesn't happen on Amazon. People buy the thing that they already know about, or their attention is driven to a few relatively small number of best-selling books. And so attention is going more and more to a smaller number of things, and new authors, new products have a hard time making it to market. And then the last piece of the implications of this I want to note is that this really has major implications for democracy. And there's the sort of more obvious version of that, which is that Amazon has a lot of power. They put their second headquarters in Washington, D.C. for this reason. It gets them a lot of influence over people who work in government. They have gotten all kinds of, there's all kinds of influence that they are exerting over government, and that's deeply concerning. But there's also something more fundamental that I think is at odds with democracy, which is that if you think about it, Amazon is increasingly regulating our economy. They're deciding which businesses succeed and fail, who is allowed to compete in the marketplace, and on what terms. If you think about what a market is, in a democratic society, a market is an open place where the parameters of that is set by public rules. Like, we decide these are the weights and measures have to be accurate, and this is how trading is going to happen. We set whatever the rules are, we set them, and everyone is subject to the same rules, more or less. That's the idea of a market in a democracy. But more and more of our trade is happening in this private arena, where the rules, such as they are set by Amazon. They are, in effect, a kind of private government regulating other entities and other operators within the economy. And I guess this conversation about this part of this about government really brings me to the last part of what I wanted to offer today, which is just looking a little bit at, like, how did Amazon become so powerful? How is it that this company came along and took over so much? And the answer to that really has to do with major shifts in public policy. In the 1980s, we radically changed our anti-monopoly laws. We had very strong monopoly laws to control concentrations of power. Those laws were adopted beginning in the late 19th century and into the early part of the 20th century. They were enforced very strongly for many decades. And for a variety of reasons, in the 1980s, we didn't get rid of those laws. They're still on the books, but the agencies that are in charge with enforcing them radically changed how they interpret what the laws mean, and as such sort of turn them on their head, so that instead of being used to disperse power and to break up private power, the laws in a way began to favor concentration of power. And so for the last 40 years, part of the reason that our economy is become increasingly concentrated is because of that shift in law. And in particular, Amazon was able to come along and engage in anti-competitive tactics that would have been drawn antitrust scrutiny had it been a generation earlier. They came along at this moment when a lot of that had been relaxed. And so they were able to engage in very predatory kinds of behavior that they would not have been allowed to engage in before. And that begins to explain how we've developed this, this digital marketplace that is so consolidated and that is not competitive, is not open, is not diverse. The good news is that there's a growing movement here and across Europe as well to resurrect anti-monopoly and to make to both bring back those existing laws and to make new laws to address these specific problems around digital markets. We had here in the US, we had Congress engaged in a 15-month investigation of the big tech companies and came out with a report last October that found that these companies have monopoly power, that they're having terrible effects across the economy. And the report calls for new legislation, a bunch of new legislation. We're expecting to see bills introduced in Congress in the coming months to take those proposals and turn them into law. And my organization, along with a lot of labor, small business, and community groups, are working really hard right now to push for passage of those laws and ultimately to break up Amazon and to regulate its platform. And so with that, I will turn it over for any questions that people have or comments that people want to make.
Thank you very much for that. That was excellent, and I'm sure that everyone agrees with me that this has been most thought-provoking. I have quite a few questions, but I will not abuse my moderator rights, and I will turn to the Q&A box. Please feel free to add any questions there. And at the same time, if you would like to be heard as well, technology is there, so I can make that happen, provided that you raise your virtual hands. So I can see here one question. Do you know whether Amazon has been subject to any antitrust competition authority investigations, which I think that you kind of touched on towards the end of your talk. And the second part of this question is, if not, or I guess that if not to a substantial degree, why not? And to what extent is that a result of corporate capture?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have started to get some investigations of Amazon. And I will say, I guess the thing I want to say is that this is a company that should have been under antitrust investigation more than a decade ago. And so our antitrust agencies have gone so far off track that they allowed this company to grow as massive as it is, as powerful as it is, and did nothing for many, many, many years, even when it was, I think, clear to any ordinary person. So I will give a quick example, which is in the mid-2000s, around 2006, 2007, Amazon was a big online retailer, but they still had competition online. There were other companies that were quite popular. One of them was a company called Zappos, which sold shoes. And they had great customer service. It was, you could order all these shoes and they would show up on your doorstep. You could try them on and then you could just send them all back. People loved Zappos. And it was a sort of a fun company, and had this unique approach to doing online business. But Amazon was very nervous about them as a competitor. And so what Amazon did is that they began to sell shoes at a loss, steeply discounted shoes. They were losing a ton of money, selling them below their own cost. They lost over $100 million selling shoes at a loss. And Zappos, the smaller company, they only sold shoes. They didn't have all of these other businesses that they could get money from. They just sold shoes. And at first they were like, well, we've got to try to match Amazon's prices or we're going to lose all our customers. So they tried that, but of course, they're just losing tons of money. And you can't do that forever. Amazon can do that forever, but they can't. And so eventually they decided they had to sell themselves to Amazon. And so Zappos is now part of Amazon. And that below cost pricing, it's known as predatory pricing. Technically that's illegal, but there were court cases and enforcement decisions made in the 1980s and 1990s that basically made it's so hard to prove, set the bar so high that predatory pricing is effectively legal at this point. And the antitrust authorities haven't gone after that. There were many other cases along the way. Amazon's acquisition of Whole Foods, a big grocery chain here, is one example where that was allowed to go through, even with no additional scrutiny. It was just very quickly approved and moved through. So I just want to say initially that the antitrust agencies absolutely asleep at the job, and I would argue wedded to this ideology that they couldn't see clearly. But in part because of new scholarship, new advocacy, new ways of looking at these things, and growing sort of push, we have now got the Federal Trade Commission is apparently reported to be investigating Amazon. We know that some state attorneys general are also looking at Amazon. There's an investigation in the EU, and I believe maybe Germany as well has a separate investigation. A lot of these investigations center on the marketplace and the abuse of sellers, the way Amazon can self-preference its own products. So this is good to see these developments. I will just say one last thing on this point, which is because of the ways that the law has been so weakened, and because we have these really bad court precedents that make it very hard to use the law effectively and really to get at the particular kinds of problems that Amazon poses and to get at solutions really through a court case it's difficult, and it would take many years, and it's unclear we would even arrive at where we need to go in terms of the remedy that a court would impose. And for all of those reasons, we feel very strongly that it's critical that Congress step in and actually pass legislation to address digital platforms directly and to get all of antitrust law back on track, away from where the courts have taken it. And in particular, we're calling, as the investigation in Congress, one of the recommendations that we strongly support is a recommendation that Amazon be broken up into multiple companies and that its platform be regulated. And so, yes, we're seeing investigations, but we're not confident that those are going to solve the problem. We do need action from Congress.
I will move on to the next question, and I will sort of hijack that question as well, because I was hoping that I could ask something myself. So apologies if I'm mispronouncing the name. That's Fiorella Piccioni. And she's asking whether you could tell us a bit more about the practices that Amazon uses to influence policies and to exercise their power in government. I would add to this another thing that came to mind, and this is when you at a point mentioned that Amazon is rivaling the US Postal Services. What came to mind is really this inscription at one of the Postal Services buildings in New York. where it says neither snow nor rain nor heat shall state shall be an obstacle to these couriers from shift completion of their tasks, or something along these lines. And it is building a rather iconic image of the postal worker, almost as part of what the government can do for the citizen. And now, fast forward to this year, we've been seeing Amazon alongside other major corporations possibly playing the role of the state when it comes to protecting us from COVID. Amazon, for example, if I'm not mistaken, they were at the forefront of securing PPE. So hijacking this question, I would like to add another part to it, which is, to what extent is Amazon replacing the state as well?
Yes, yes. Those are all great questions. So yeah, I very much feel that the Amazon is in fact taking on some of the functions of government. It's taking on that regulatory function. You could look at the fees that it charges other companies, which have no choice but to pay those fees. They're obligatory in the sense that you can't go anywhere else. There is no other place to go. You have to sell on Amazon's platform and so on. That you could look at that and say, well, that's a tax. You know, this is a government that regulates a market, levies a tax on the people in that market, the companies in that market. And ultimately, if you have a dispute, so for example, one of the smaller businesses that we've written about in our work is a company called Top Shelf. And it was started by a guy who's a barber. And he started selling hair care products online and built up a business selling mainly on Amazon because they are the market. And he eventually was employing 50 people, and he created, this pretty good sized business in his community in Michigan. But over time, Amazon started charging him higher and higher and higher fees. He lost, he started having to turn over more and more to Amazon. He became unprofitable. He had to lay everyone off. And then Amazon accused him of having a product that was counterfeit. And they said, we're going to have to seize all of your inventory. They seized, tens of thousands, or it might have even been hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of inventory of his that were in their warehouses. And he can't get it out. He can't therefore sell it anywhere else. His entire business is just shut down overnight by Amazon. And they have his inventory, all of his valuable goods. And how can he get it back? Well, he can't go to court, because when you sign on to be a seller on Amazon, in the fine print of the terms of service, you agree to arbitration. And the arbitration process is heavily run by Amazon. So now you have to go through this process where you may or may not be successful. And so they not only are regulating and taxing, but they are judge, jury, and executioner over your business. So I very much think that we should understand this as a form of a kind of autocratic government power. And, to the question that the person asked, and it wouldn't surprise me, to your point, that they are, after relying on the Postal Service for many, many years, and indeed learning from the Postal Service how to do that business, Amazon has now brought a lot of that in-house. And they could very much, the Postal Service is already struggling for a variety of reasons. They could really undermine and put the Postal Service on very shaky ground. And then step in and say, well, we can do these deliveries. Why don't we become the primary way that goods and mail move around the country? I could very easily see that happening. So they could supplant that function. And along the way, they are taking Postal Service workers are unionized, typically pretty well paid. They have healthcare and everything. Amazon's subcontracted drivers, very low wages, poor working conditions, not a good job. So they're undermining the sort of quality employment in the process. In terms of how they influence government, they are now the largest lobbying. They spend more than any other company on lobbying. So some of it is straight up like campaign cash, lobbying, just having that kind of influence. But I think the other thing that's deeply concerning is that they decided to locate their next big headquarters in Washington, D.C., just outside the Capitol. They're going to have 25,000 employees there. And you think about the kind of like soft power that you get from that, because suddenly, you know, Amazon employees' kids are in the same schools with the kids of government, officials. And the ability to have that kind of influence, to have Amazon be part of the air that people in DC breathe, the water that people drink, just to sort of have it be so immersive in that city. I feel certain that the reason that Jeff Bezos chose to put the next headquarters in DC was because he knows that there is no other company that can come along and challenge Amazon. They are so dominant that they are beyond challenge in the marketplace, that the only thing that could stop him from doing what he wants to do is the power of a democratic government. And so he is determined to surround that city and envelop that city, and thereby, he hopes, prevent action to check Amazon's power.
I'm now seeing a lot of questions, so I'm I'm trying to combine them if I can. But here's another one from you. This one from Chiyokyo Forji, and what is asked here is whether you think that we need a big move to break up big tech, a bit along the lines of FDR's 1933 Glass-Steagall Act when applied to the big banks of that age. There is also something to be said about Amazon's use of vertical mergers integration to expand its market share. And this is in part an antitrust issue, but there is a need for more proactive legislation to ring-fence areas of the economy as no-go areas for big tech. What's your take on that?
Yes, I mean, that's exactly right. In the 1930s, part of FDR's analysis of why we had the Great Depression was that there was this concentration of power. And, part of the New Deal that FDR brought along was this idea that we need to control corporate power. We need to break up corporate power. And in regard to the financial system, absolutely, Glass-Steagall separated investment banking from commercial banking and brought commercial banking, just sort of ordinary regular banking under regulation, created deposit insurance, and basically created a very safe and stable financial industry that lasted for many decades until we dismantled Glass-Steagall. And similarly, he and Congress at that time passed new antitrust legislation. They created very aggressive antitrust enforcement. They went after a lot of companies, broke up big concentrations of power. They also supported strong unions, social insurance. And that package of things, when you think about it, all of those things were really about how do we ensure that ordinary people have agency, have authority, have a fair deal in the economy. Whether it's the right to form a business without being crushed by a big monopoly, or the right to form a union and be able to have a say over your job, or to have social insurance if you're unemployed. All of those things fit together to basically rebalance our economy in favor of ordinary people having the freedom and the authority and the wherewithal to engage in the economy without the coercion of these big companies. We're very much back at that moment, that same exact kind of moment again. We need the same kind of solutions. And I very much agree. We are pushing for what you could say a Glass-Steagall kind of law, but a law that would essentially say if you are a monopoly gatekeeper, so if you are a dominant marketplace and therefore a gatekeeper online, you can't engage in other lines of business. You have to be a standalone company, and therefore the conflict of interest where Amazon can preference its own products or undermine particular competitors, we remove that because we say, Amazon, you can't be all of these different things. Those companies have to be spun off into standalone companies. And the marketplace needs to be subject to like common carrier regulation in the same way that railroads, telephone lines, other kinds of infrastructure in the physical world we have rules about that say, you have to be a neutral arbiter. You have to treat all comers fairly. You have to have fair pricing. There's regulation to ensure that the public interest is served on that critical infrastructure that everyone relies on. And we need that exact same approach with these digital marketplaces.
I'm seeing a couple of questions now about taxation. So the non-payment of taxes, as Valerie Nelson says, by companies such as Amazon in countries where economic activity is occurring undermines the capacity of governments to fund public services. Can there be put any pressure from this angle? And then a related question is whether there is any scope for digital cooperative platforms, or if there is no pressure to be put from a taxation point of view, then what about competition? For example, Alibaba at a global level. How can we put some more pressure from these different angles?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think fundamentally the antitrust angle is important, but there's absolutely the tax piece has been critical. I mean, from the very beginning, go back to 1995 when Jeff Bezos founded Amazon, he has made getting tax breaks and tax advantages a core part of his strategy. And that's what I think this whole like libertarian Silicon Valley idea of like, we're just, we don't need government. We're out here doing our thing and free market, blah, 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 is such a joke, because you look at these companies, and Amazon especially was propped up by handouts from government from the very beginning. They got a huge tax advantage by not having to collect sales tax in the US, which is a kind of, I don't know if you have that, which is sort of similar. They didn't have to collect this tax that every other retailer, online or off, had to collect. I mean, that's a huge, if you were buying an expensive item online back in the early 2000s and you could save 10% on a $300 product, I mean, that is real money. So people would seek out Amazon solely because they had that tax advantage. And then as that gave way a few years back, Amazon started asking for subsidies when it would build a warehouse. We did a research report a few years ago and found that more than half of Amazon's warehouses have received handouts from government, multi-million-dollar giveaways, subsidies, tax breaks that are not available to other companies. And of course, with its headquarters search a couple of years ago, that was the deal. We're going to put a new headquarters somewhere, and we want a big handout from a government. And when you add all of that up, Amazon in the US has picked up almost $4 billion in subsidies. It also pays effectively no federal taxes. It uses tax haven in Luxembourg and other places to like move money around and get out of paying taxes. Just to put that in perspective, my little neighborhood bookstore or the local grocery store, their effective federal tax rate in the US is around 20%. Amazon's is basically zero. Like, this is not a fair playing field. And when Amazon says, oh, well, we're winning because we're out competing, it's like, no, you're winning because you get all of this favorable treatment, and you have been able to skirt the anti-monopoly laws as well through your behavior. And so I really very much agree with the sort of premise of the question, that there are lots of different policies that we might use to begin to address this. I think the antitrust piece is absolutely crucial, but we do need a level playing field in terms of taxes. And I won't go into this, but we could talk about many other things. For example, in cities, Amazon will clog the streets. Maybe it does this in London, but they will clog the streets with their delivery vans and actually set up along the sidewalk and carry out distribution on public space. Other businesses aren't allowed to do that, but they somehow managed to get away with this. They're also clogging in New York City. I just read this morning the garbage, because of all the packaging, the cardboard and the plastic is just greatly increased the amount of stuff that people are throwing out, and it's causing real problems in the city. So there are lots of ways in which policy basically is put given Amazon this advantage that no one has.
In the interest of time, I will now try and group everything in two final questions. Apologies to everyone who have your question up, and it might escape my attention. I see a frequent theme in most of these questions, which is um, so. Is there any way to fix things, to make things better? At the end of the day, as consumers, we feel very much captivated, to use Sharon Pereira's words here, that's the convenient thing to do for consumers. At the same time, though, what is the scope for SMEs and for smaller companies, for the shop around the corner? What's the advice that you have with regards to counter this stranglehold, if we can?
Yeah, I'll try to give quick answers since we want to get through maybe a couple more questions. But first of all, in the chat, I put a couple of links. One is to our newsletter, which we send out every few weeks if you just want to stay in touch with our research and work. And then also further back, you'll see a link that takes you to our page with all of our reports and other work around Amazon if you want to do any further reading or want more information. And the short answer is, I think that, it's a great thing to go looking for local businesses, and you will often find that businesses are selling online that you didn't know were selling online, and that will do home delivery as well. That is a lot of what independent businesses can do, and so it's worth looking around. And on the one hand, it can seem initially like it has more inconvenience, especially because you maybe aren't familiar with some of these businesses in your area that are doing this. But in the long run, you build that relationship with that local business, and there's a lot of convenience that can come from that. I called up a local toy store here and said, I need to send something to my 7-year-old niece for her birthday. And they were like, oh, we know just the thing. And they had it wrapped and waiting for me at the back door to pick up. I just gave them my credit card online. It was so convenient. I didn't even have to figure out what the thing was. So, and then there's a lot to be said for the places that we live being more interesting. Our day-to-day lives are really our communities. A lot of their personality really comes from those individual businesses. And I really want to live in a place where people can have a great idea and go out and start something and not be crushed by Amazon, have that freedom. So I would, very much encourage and invite people to look around a little bit more, to be a little more, think about, well, I can ship this away from Amazon. That said, no one should feel guilty about Amazon. Amazon is a monopoly. They have monopoly power, and there are not a lot of options. And so it's not on us as consumers to solve this. And if we try to think that we're going to solve it as consumers, that's how we fail. They want us to be thinking as consumers. But what we really need to do is to be thinking of citizens, because that's where our real muscle is. And we need to use our power as citizens to address this. That's what they're afraid of, and that's what we need to do.
I will finish with one final question, but I'm trying to keep up with the questions here in the Q&A box. There is a kind of an optimism, and I'm really a pessimist, so I will just read it out without commenting as much as I can. Natalia Urban suggests, well, things might be, and I'm paraphrasing your question, Natalia, so feel free to jump in if that's not what you're asking. Things might be looking a bit better over here in the European Union. So is there anything that we can do to help you guys out over there at the US? And then there's also Gavin Connaughton, and he's asking a simple thing. So is this Amazon really, or is this capitalism? Is there anything that can be done, or this is just how things are, and we just need to rely to this invisible hand, whatever this might be?
So let's see, I'll take the second one first. I don't use the word capitalism a lot because I'm not sure we all have a shared meaning of it. I'm not quite sure what we always mean by the word capitalism. I will say that markets have a certain magic. I mean, I enjoy going, like, just to take a very simple example, we have a farmer's market, and there's all kinds of different things that people grow. There's a very quirky farmer who grows these weird heirloom vegetables. Like that's his thing, you know? And so there's a creativity to a market where he has this idea and he can offer this and see if he can find an audience of people who want that. And I love that part of markets, you know, that creativity. It's not all just organized from a top-down perspective. It's kind of a bottom-up thing. And I think that's wonderful. But it's important to remember that markets do not exist without rules. This idea that markets are somehow could exist without government, that doesn't work. In order to have a market, sorry, there's sirens going by. In order to have a market, you have to have rules. You have to have rules that govern how people interact, that say, you know, you can't just show up with a gun and say, give me all your money. And that's not a market, right? So you have to have something in terms of rules. And so to me, the question is to ask is not capitalism, markets, not markets. It's like, well, what are the rules? And from my perspective, the rules should be, how do we break up these concentrations of power? How do we disperse more power to more people and not have it so contained in one entity? And labor unions are one tool for that. Antitrust law is another tool, fair taxes, all of these publicly owned businesses and institutions like the postal service, all of these are ways for ordinary people to actually take control and to pull power out from the hands of the few. And so for me, yes to markets, but yes to rules that decentralize power. And then the other question, about whether Europe is doing a better job. I have mixed feelings on that. Europe has definitely got a much stronger labor tradition than we do. We have a big fight going on right now. There's an effort to unionize an Amazon warehouse in Alabama. The vote ends next week, and we're gonna find out. It's a very powerful group of workers. I don't know if they're gonna win. Labor law here is so stacked against workers. Amazon is able to engage in these, they can fire people who've been engaged in organizing and they don't really get punished for it. They can engage in all these tactics to hold back the union, and they might succeed. We'll see how that goes next week. So I think Europe is a little bit better off in that regard to some extent. I'm not sure that your anti-monopoly policy is any better than ours. Europe does not have a tradition of breaking up companies. It has a tradition more of regulating. And I am concerned that while there's regulations that we need, that I don't think you can actually solve the problem of Amazon with regulation. I think you create a lot of bureaucracy that won't actually be very effective. And that we need to deal with, this is a structural problem. And so we need to deal with it from a structural standpoint, which to me means breaking it up.
The final question for today. I'm really sorry if I disappoint people by not being able to ask everything. Is it perhaps time in terms of turning towards a more equitable society and striving for responsibility and accountability? Is it time to return to a formal epoch of of small businesses? And then another solution could perhaps be put forth along the lines of cooperative buying through digital platforms, so to speak, not to buy as individual consumers, but buying products and services as a cooperative. Would any of these be good solutions towards an equitable society, you think?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think small independent businesses are part of a more democratic society, obviously with the right rules and regulations in place, but the ability of individuals or groups of individuals to have a small enterprise and be able to do what they're doing without being crushed by a big company, I think is important. Cooperatives are important, not only consumer cooperatives, but also, smaller businesses can form together to form buying groups or to maybe build a shared digital platform where they can offer their wares and goods online through a cooperative kind of model. And public, is very important. We talked about the Postal Service. I can imagine a future in which we have a robust postal service that actually builds its own warehouses. And now you're a small e-commerce merchant selling online, you can have your goods, instead of being in Amazon's warehouses, you can have your goods be in the Postal Service's warehouses. And those can be unionized, high quality jobs. They can give you fair prices, so they're not gouging you and taking those big fees. And now, because we have this public infrastructure, the small private businesses have a fair chance to actually be successful. So I think all of these things in combination, begin to get us where we need to go. But crucial to all of them is having good policy, and in particular, as I keep saying, sort of we have to address Amazon's power, really head on, in order to enable any of those other kinds of things to have the conditions in which they can succeed. They could all be very successful in and of themselves, but right now we have effectively a rigged market. And so we got to unrig it in order for us to be able to have that really nice and more sustainable and equitable future that the questioner describes.
I think that we have reached the end of today's event. Thank you very much, Stacey, for this amazing talk and this discussion. I wish we had more time, but in the meantime, there is one recommendation, if I may, and this is to visit the links that are shared here in the chat function, so that you can read more about Stacey's work. And I will leave this open for another minute or so once I finish this session. We are holding our breaths to see what happens on the 29th of March, if I'm not mistaken, in Alabama. And I'm sure that this will also influence matters here as well. I'm seeing Natalia's comment here that what's usually the case is that the US is pushing they're setting the tone for us. So it's probably Amazon that needs to be stopped somehow, either with actions such as the one in Alabama, or more orchestrated. And if I may add a comment there, I think that one of the times when the European Union turned the tables was with the GDPR and the hefty fines. So who knows? Perhaps there is some hope there this time in terms of competition or digital services. There is this upcoming Digital Services Act at an EU level. We'll see. And with that hopeful note, thank you very much once again, and see you all next time in one of our next webinars. Stacey, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really nice to be with you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Goodbye.